They said Gabriel Harlow had everything a man could measure: towers that touched clouds, a name engraved in steel, and silence that obeyed him like a servant. But the day a small hand pushed open his boardroom door, carrying her mother's résumé instead of a doll, the arithmetic of his life broke. She wasn't supposed to be there. Yet somehow she arrived right on time. There are buildings that hum like cathedrals for money. Gabriel Harlow owned most of them. From his office on the 49th floor, the city looked like obedience arranged into light. Streets ran like veins of silver, and below them people pulsed. Tiny, interchangeable, predictable. He liked that. Predictability was the closest thing to peace he'd ever learned to buy. Each morning began the same way: silence, espresso, and a reflection that neither aged nor apologized. His mirror didn't dare. The board called him visionary. Investors called him indispensable. He called himself done with needing anyone. But success, when it grows too loud, begins to echo. And lately Gabriel had started hearing the echo of something he'd buried years ago. A small voice he couldn't quite name. He ignored it the way rich men ignore hunger. That morning, winter had written its breath on the windows. A low fog pressed against the glass, blurring the skyline like it wanted to remind him that even towers can disappear if you step far enough back. His assistant, Lena, moved quietly through the office, arranging folders like prayers she didn't believe in. "Final interviews begin in 20 minutes, sir," she said softly. Gabriel nodded without looking up. His eyes stayed on a single signature, his own, scrawled at the bottom of a contract that would close another acquisition by noon. The ink was still wet. "Tell security," he said. "No interruptions." He didn't like interruptions. They reminded him of being 9 years old, standing in a shelter lobby, holding a crumpled application his mother couldn't sign because her hands shook too badly. The receptionist had smiled in the same polite, tight-lipped way people smile when pity wants to look professional. "Mr. Harlow?" Lena's voice drew him back. He blinked, the memory retreating like a wave. "Yes," he said, clearing his throat. "Send the first candidate when they arrive." Outside, the city went on pretending to be eternal. Inside, the air smelled of leather, paper, and control. The clock struck 10. The glass doors hissed open. Except it wasn't a candidate who entered. It was a child, small, maybe 8 or 9, wearing a cardigan too big for her shoulders and clutching a folded envelope like it might bite if she let go. Her hair was tied with a blue ribbon frayed at the edges, the kind of ribbon that had survived more mornings than it should have. Security hesitated at the door, unsure if this was a prank or poetry. Gabriel looked up slowly. "This is a private floor," he said. "You're not supposed to be here." The girl nodded solemnly. "I know. But Mom's sick. She said she couldn't come, so I came instead." Lena froze. The room did too. "Your mother?" Gabriel asked, his voice landing somewhere between disbelief and curiosity. The child stepped closer, the echo of her shoes fragile against the marble. "She was supposed to have an interview today," she said, holding out the envelope. "For the office job. She told me not to let anyone down." Gabriel stared at the paper in her hands. His name, typed neatly at the top, glared back at him like an accusation. "Interview with Miss Clara Wynne, administrative position, 10 a.m. He exhaled. "Your mother sent you here?" "She didn't want to," the girl said quickly. "But the fever came back last night. She said the rent's late again, and if she missed this, she might not get another chance." Gabriel's throat tightened before his pride could stop it. The city continued humming beneath them, unaware that the smallest story in the building was quietly rewriting the largest one. He studied her. She was trembling, but not from fear. From the weight of trying to be braver than her age allowed. "What's your name?" "Lila," she said softly. "Lila Wynne." "Lila," he repeated, the name landing strangely on his tongue. "Does your mother know you're here?" "She knows I left. She just doesn't know I found the right floor." Something like a smile tried to reach his mouth and failed. He motioned to the chair across from his desk. "Sit down, Lila." Lena's eyes widened, but she obeyed his unspoken command to leave the room. When the door clicked shut, silence took a seat with them. Lila placed the envelope on the table. She said her handwriting's not very good, so I printed it out. The words are hers though. Gabriel unfolded the papers. The resume was modest secretarial work, part-time shifts, volunteer clerical experience. Nothing special. And yet, every line seemed to hum with a kind of dignity he couldn't quite categorize. At the bottom, in smaller letters, a reference. Community Center Literacy Program for Single Mothers. He traced it with his finger, then looked at Lila. She teaches. She helps, the girl said. She says helping is just teaching without the title. He leaned back, a strange ache threading through his chest. For the first time in years, he didn't know what question to ask next. Outside, the fog began to lift. Light touched the glass like forgiveness testing its courage. Gabriel's voice softened. Tell me something, Lila. Did your mother ask you to say anything to me? The girl nodded. Yes. She said to tell you thank you for the chance, even if she doesn't get it. He blinked once slowly. That's all. Lila thought for a moment. And she said? The child hesitated, glancing down at her shoes. She said rich people are busy, but kindness doesn't take meetings. Silence. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Gabriel looked at her, really looked at her. The chipped fingernails, the careful posture of a child trying to protect her mother's pride. Something inside him shifted quietly, like a door that had been locked for years finding its key. He took a long breath. Tell your mother she just got the job. Lila's eyes widened. Really? Really? Her shoulders sagged with relief, as if the whole building had been sitting on them. Thank you, sir. He smiled faintly. Don't thank me yet. You still have to tell her she'll be working for a man who's learning to be human again. Lila tilted her head. Is that hard? Yes, he said. But I think I just found my teacher. Outside the office, the morning began again, unaware that one sentence had already changed its meaning. Morning resumed its ceremony, but something delicate had already changed its choreography. The building still exhaled refrigerated air and rehearsed the sound of certainty, yet there was a new variable walking its corridors now. The image of a small girl with a frayed blue ribbon, standing where budgets and bravado usually stood. The memory followed Gabriel Harlow from room to room like a scent that refused to be neutralized. He tried to return to the arithmetic of conquest, meetings, margins, mergers, but numbers, once obedient, began to flicker as if a child had touched the dimmer. He encountered his black metal and noticed a detail he had not permitted for years. Fatigue that did not come from work. In the boardroom, he performed fluency and profit the way pianists perform scales, yet beneath his polished tempo, old chords began to hum. A lobby from childhood where his mother once waited for mercy. A receptionist trained to call pity professionalism. Hands that shook because life had made of them a seismograph. The company watched him the way aquariums watch the person who taps the glass. Assistants exchanged careful glances that pretended to be about calendars. Directors leaned forward half an inch more than usual, and the head of human resources prepared policies like umbrellas for weather predicted long ago. The institution understood that power had felt something, and institutions like castles dislike drafts. He reviewed the resume again when he should have been approving a vendor slate. The document was modest to the point of invisibility, yet the invisibility was what arrested him. Invisible work that keeps rooms tidy and moods stable and days moving. The kind of labor that earns no plaque and therefore props up the wall on which plaques are hung. He found the line about the literacy program and paused. He disliked the way the word single and single mothers had been taught by culture to wear a small apology. In the silence of his office, the apology felt misplaced. News of the decision slid through internal channels faster than memos travel. Some received it as a human interlude and let it warm them for a minute before they returned to their screens. Some measured it as risk, the way accountants measure weather against shipments. A few imagined a headline and tested its temperature against shareholder patience. The head of HR arrived at his door with concern pressed into courteous posture. There were procedures, she reminded without speaking. There were precedents, she hinted with her eyebrows. There were doors that should be unlocked only with certain keys. He listened the way people listen when they are not ready to argue. He nodded and let her leave with the dignity that comes from being heard even when you have not been obeyed. Institutions are kept alive by dignity they did not always create. He left the tower at dusk and walked without security for the first time in months. The city smelled of metal and old rain. Alleyways rehearsed the grammar of hunger. A delivery cyclist threaded physics into prayer. He had always believed cities remember the men who build them. That evening he discovered they also remember the children who forgive them. Near a crosswalk he watched a boy steady a grocery bag for a woman whose hands were full of the day. It occurred to him that kindness is simply choreography learned by paying attention to other people's feet. He did not sleep well. In the hours when the building hushed and the mind becomes an archivist, he returned to a thin blanket on a shelter cot and a ceiling that had learned to leak exactly over the spot where a boy's chest tried to believe in mornings. He remembered a coach who loaned him a pair of clean shoes and called the loan a reward so the gift could arrive without embarrassment. He remembered learning that power, in its softest form, is the art of removing shame from assistance. He had built an empire so he would never again need to be helped. It had not occurred to him that power could be measured by how easily people breathe around you. At 9, fog rubbed its shoulder against glass again. By 10, protocols resumed their crispness. By 11, the building attempted to forget. Then the elevator opened and memory became presence. The child arrived without ceremony, led by an assistant who had decided not to interfere with whatever fate was practicing. She carried a plastic folder held against her chest like a shield, wore the same cardigan, the same ribbon, trying to be brave. The receptionist offered a cup of water with the reverence of someone passing a holy object. Someone from security took 3 steps forward and then, recalling the new arithmetic, took 3 steps back. This time there were no words from either side that paper could later quote. There was only a brief audience in a corner of the lobby where morning light practiced calligraphy on marble. A nod, a smile, a chair offered that made a child taller, a pen placed in small fingers that wanted to feel equal to employment. He noticed the way she looked at the pen, as though it were permission made visible. He noticed the way his employees looked at her, as though they'd all been reminded of first days in their own smaller stories. The hiring was processed in a back office where routine pretends to be fate. He reviewed the forms with uncharacteristic patience, amended a clause that had always been unfriendly to people who take care of other people, instructed payroll to be prompt as if promptness could inoculate a household against fever. He saw that dignity like speed when bills are not patient. When everything was done, he returned to the work the world recognizes. Calls to men who move decimal points. Approvals that make money breed. Timing that converts events into momentum. Afternoon wore its winter light like an old suit. The building fed itself on meetings. In one of them a young manager presented a deck with colors that believed too much in themselves. The numbers were confident. The story they told was plausible, and yet Gabriel could not concentrate on momentum graphs because he noticed the manager's hands. They shook at the edges the way his mother's hands had done, only this time the tremor belonged not to exhaustion but to ambition performing calm. He asked a question that made the young man's breathing return to its correct rhythm. He did not know why he had asked it. Perhaps the body recognizes fear and tries, in its own language, to set a metronome. Word of the new hire reached an investor who understood philanthropy as reputation laundering and growth as sanctification. A call came in with velvet criticism about standards, a reminder that empathy can look like weakness if you price it incorrectly. He let the critique run its course and felt inside himself a strange steadiness, as if a part of him had just stopped paying interest on a loan he never actually needed. The mother arrived 2 days later with an apology refusing to be spoken aloud. Fever had lessened but left its fingerprint. She wore a coat that knew too much about February, carried gratitude like a parcel so carefully it did not appear at all. She moved through orientation with the precision of those who cannot afford to redo anything. In a corner of the training room, he watched an instructor explain systems with a voice softened by personal respect rather than pity. He watched the mother's hands grip the mouse as if technology were another gate in a city that had installed too many. He watched her learn. Learning is a choreography also. He had her workspace moved near a window. He told himself it was because light improves productivity in administrative roles. The truth, unadmitted, was that he wanted her to have a view that suggested the future did not end in fluorescent rectangles. She carried into the corner a small photograph in a cracked frame, the kind of frame that long ago had become sentimental by refusing to break. The picture, he guessed, had been taken on a day that had cost too much and was therefore priceless. He averted his eyes so the reverence could proceed without supervision. Changes, small, almost impolite in their kindness, began multiplying. HR revised the late policy to recognize that single guardians often fight battles before dawn. Security updated the guest protocol to add a field quietly labeled care exception. The cafeteria found that its leftover policy could carry dignity better than its trash bins, and a manager who had been saving kindness for retirement began spending it like a currency that earns interest only when circulated. No speech announced these changes. They moved through the building the way warmth moves through a house when someone opens a door and forgets to close it. One evening he passed a conference room and discovered the literacy program had overflowed from outside life into his building. In the glassed-in space usually reserved for posturing, a semicircle of employees and neighbors sat with notebooks open and mouths forming sounds that would become sentences. The mother, with the same quiet authority she used to fold blankets and balance rent, guided a hand to the correct line, then praised progress as if progress were a child that liked to be noticed gently. He did not enter. He watched from the hallway as the room colored itself with comprehension. It occurred to him that understanding is an architecture, and some people know how to build it without blueprints. Another day a delivery arrived for the child: construction paper, a small jar of dull scissors, a borrowed set of crayons that still remembered previous owners. The package whispered of shared desks and community hands. On his way to the elevator he found, tucked discreetly beside the potted ficus that could never decide whether it wanted to live, a paper house carefully cut and folded, the windows outlined in blue, the door open. The house was labeled with a single precise word that had cost its maker something to write. Someday. He left the paper house where it was, like a prophecy that prefers not to be handled. He started walking the stairs instead of taking the elevator. He said it was for health. The truth was more precise. The stairwells carried the honest smell of effort. He encountered cleaners who greeted him without the posture people use around power when they know power is listening. He learned the names of 2 men who arrived before the heat and left after the light, and he noticed how the building's morning depended on the choreography their bodies had memorized. He realized that empires are not floating machines. They are built atop repetitions performed by people who do not get mentioned at Investor Day. A memo arrived from legal about an upcoming deposition, in which the company intended to look impenetrable. He read through the adjectives and discovered none of them could bear the weight of a child with a ribbon or a mother with a fever. He crossed 2 sentences out and replaced them with a single, unglamorous commitment to repair a small harm the company had caused a supplier when Speed kidnapped patients. No one congratulated him for the revision. It was not the kind of decision that produces applause. It merely allowed someone to breathe. Winter practice being itself with unworried conviction. The city's light grew honest earlier in the day and retired without drama. In those shorter afternoons, the building's glass made mirrors of the sky's gray and taught the lobby to rehearse dusk. He found that he did not dread the hour when work goes quiet and rooms begin to listen to the people walking through them. He began timing his day to pass through the lobby when school also released its citizens. If he was fortunate, the path that responsibility took would cross the path that childhood takes. Sometimes he encountered the child at the revolving doors. She would be carrying something that represented achievement in a school language, glue on construction paper, a star earned for effort, a library book that smelled of many hands. He did not speak. He slowed enough to let the rhythm of trust continue. She looked at him with the steady regard children reserve for adults who are trying. Approval from a child cannot be purchased and therefore confers a rare wealth. Investors returned, as investors do, to remind him of the contract between growth and mercy. He listened and heard, beneath their polished concerns, a fear the market had taught them to carry like an heirloom. He informed them, without plea and without arrogance, that the enterprise would remain sharp on price, stern on quality, and human in places the ledger has no code for. He found that firmness when clean does not require volume. On a Friday that entered the calendar with no particular intention, a storm rehearsed itself in the west. Weather maps invented geometry, umbrellas gathered near doors like opinions. The building settled into the tone cities take when they know wind will soon revise the day. At 3, a message slipped in from the school: early dismissal. He watched staff rearrange schedules the way mothers rearrange afternoons. He instructed a driver to be available, and discovered the driver had already left without needing orders. Good buildings learn each other. The child arrived at the lobby damp but undefeated, hair frizzed into a crown that had no interest in permission. She carried her plastic folder, now decorated with stickers that had learned to outlast rain. Beside her walked the mother, thinner than prudence permits, wrapped in the coat that kept losing arguments with February. They reached the revolving door and laughed the kind of laugh people make when wind insults everyone equally. He stood at a distance that permitted observation without claiming credit and watched as the guard, once a practitioner of sternness because sternness protects, bent to greet the day's smallest regular. The building bowed and it looked like a man bending. That night, when the storm found its courage and delivered it against glass, he stood in his office with the lights off and let darkness teach his windows to be honest. He surveyed the tower's floors stacked like a spine and imagined each vertebrae labeled with a name previously undocumented. Someone who warmed food at odd hours so another could return to a home that still smelled like care. Someone who deciphered a bill until numbers surrendered their intimidation. Someone who told a child a story with a voice not yet healed from the day's own weathers. He disliked the sudden taste of tears and forgave himself for disliking it. Pride had been an old friend, grief an older instructor. He took from a drawer a card his legal team had asked him to sign, one of those messages companies send their people when someone's life has been asked to be brave. He signed it and then, without instruction from anyone but memory, wrote a second card that had no letterhead. He wrote fewer words than were available to him, and more honesty than habit sanctioned. He placed the card in an envelope that looked like any other envelope. He did not address it. Some messages wait for their recipient to reveal themselves. In the days that followed, he found his sentences changing. He stopped saying our people when he meant our staff and began saying our colleagues like the word had briefly belonged to him and now belonged to everyone. He stopped ending memos with weatherless phrases and started wasting 3 syllables on thank you because gratitude loses value only when it is hoarded. He did not notice the change until someone in accounting cried in a bathroom and could not say why. Tears are often the first defenders of new climates. He understood then that a child had not interrupted his day. She had exposed its scaffolding. He had found success by making rooms behave. And now a small person had reminded him that rooms are better when they breathe. He felt the empire shift half a degree towards something not yet named. Half a degree over time relocates a continent. And because acts spool into one another, he saw the next tension gathering. The city, tired of being ignored by the weather, planned to test the limits of compassion with something heavier than rain. The company would feel it first in deliveries, then in power, then in patience. Policies would have to decide whether they served people or merely punished time. He understood a conflict had been scheduled by forces that do not read calendars. He closed his eyes and returned, briefly, to the shelter lobby of his childhood. A boy waited, holding a crumpled form, beside a mother who hid her trembling as if steadiness were a passport. He thought of that receptionist, trained to say no kindly, and wondered what her face would look like now if she saw the tower that had grown from that moment's refusal. When he opened his eyes, the windows no longer showed him a city. They showed him weather coming for everyone equally. He straightened a stack of papers, no longer pretending to be more important than breath, and he understood that the next part of the story would ask a harder question than whether a job could be offered. It would ask whether a life could be rearranged fast enough to shelter other lives when the wind announced its curriculum. He believed he was ready, but belief is only the first key. The lock would introduce itself soon. By noon the storm had discovered a voice. Meteorologists tried to give it an ordinary name so fear would cooperate, but wind does not answer to HR. It rose from the west with the slow confidence of something that had negotiated with oceans first. In the lobby, the revolving doors practiced for stubbornness. In the loading bay, pallets learned humility. In the server floors, redundancy rehearsed its speeches about immortality. Everyone knew the city was about to be reminded it belonged to weather before it belonged to money. Gabriel Harlow stood at glass that had been told it was unbreakable, watching winter take the day into its teeth. The forecast crawled along a muted screen like a patient diagnosis that pretends to be neutral. He had seen storms before. He had funded relief drives. He had signed checks that turned into crates and blankets and the careful rhetoric of aftercare. But he had never stood inside a building that was about to teach him whether his leadership was architecture or decor. At 2, operations called to report that 2 drivers had turned back on the expressway, that plows were late, that traffic had stopped rehearsing movement and begun to audition stillness. At 2:15, legal pinged him with a reminder that the pending acquisition required a final signature before market close, as if the market could still claim a closing time when daylight was being edited by wind. At 2:30, HR wrote to ask whether they should activate the remote work protocol. At 2:31, IT wrote to warn that the remote work protocol would not function. At 2:31, IT wrote to warn that the remote work protocol would not function if the power performed a vanishing act citywide. He did not answer any of them right away. Something in him, call it the boy who had learned early that important decisions do not tolerate interruption, wanted to wait for the noise to settle. Something else in him, call it the man the child had already begun to instruct, knew that waiting is a luxury at the start of other people's emergencies. He walked to the internal stairwell, because elevators become formal in weather. On floor 33, he found the facilities chief tightening a strap around a generator the size of an obstinate animal. The man had the bearing of someone who has negotiated with bolts and seasons long enough to know their tempers. He looked up, surprised to see the CEO in a place where metal speaks. "We'll hold, sir," the chief said. "If the grid behaves like last winter, we'll keep lights for essential floors. Heat is another matter. She likes to sulk when wind knocks." "What do you need?" Gabriel asked and surprised himself by meaning it like a sentence with no subtext. The chief pointed with his chin. Hands were busy. "Permission to house staff here if transit dies. Cots. Blankets. Food if catering plays hero. A decision that says this building is a person and not just a posture." "Done," Gabriel said. "Write the memo and sign my name if you have to. If anyone argues, tell them I'll call them by their first name until they stop." The chief smiled in the way practical men smile when a theory drops its tuxedo. "We'll make her a house then." By 3, the snow made a religion of itself. Street lamps rehearsed for night long before night had a chance to arrive. People became shapes. Cars became rumors. Inside the tower, screens wore the blue pallor of electrons being brave. The building's heart, a mechanical floor that used to feel like background, began to beat audibly. It was then the call came from Lena. "Sir, school released early. Lila is downstairs with her mother." The buses stopped 3 stops short. They walked the rest. He pictured them through weather, coat against coat, a small hand inside a larger one that had not been treated kindly by years. "Bring them to the conference room next to my office," he said, "and have catering send soup that remembers how to be warm." He beat them there. The conference room had glass on 2 sides and dignity on none. He turned off the overheads. Brutal lighting makes emergencies look like scoldings, and switched on the lamp a decorator had justified with a word like ambient. Light softened. He warmed his hands on a radiator that did not intend to cooperate and was, perhaps, merely a sculpture meant to look like heat. They entered like the word weather had followed them upstairs. Lila's ribbon had learned to argue with wind. Her cheeks were colored with effort, the honest kind no blush can imitate. Clara, her coat misbuttoned in that way mother's coats get when small hands were the morning's priority, stood in the doorway as if asking permission to bring meat into a room that had only ever hosted power. "You saved the day," Gabriel said, and meant the sentence in a way that confused them briefly before it warmed them. "I'm sorry," Clara began, her voice clean but tired. "We didn't know where else, the bus." She stopped before the desperation could arrive to edit her posture. "You're fine," he said. "Soup is coming. Work is suspended for anyone sensible. We'll keep you both here until the city remembers how to be a city." Lila pressed her plastic folder to the table as if it were a passport. "I brought my science project," she announced to no one and to the building itself. "It's about how plants know which way to grow." "Toward light," he said, and then regretted answering as if the question had been on an exam. "Show me later. I like to be reminded." Catering arrived with bowls that made honest steam and bread that understood timing. The 3 of them ate like a small, improbable family, silences stitching between spoons, the storm making an argument outside to which soup provided an equal and opposite rebuttal. A maintenance man knocked, apologized, replaced a light bulb that had decided to retire mid-crisis, and left with a nod that contained more solidarity than some contracts. At 3:40, as if the storm had been waiting for the correct act, the city snapped. Light did not go out, it recoiled. Screens gasped and then went modest. The mechanical floor threw its shoulders back. Generators caught the room's weight. Somewhere 3 blocks away, an electrical transformer gave up and wrote its resignation letter in sparks. In the tower, emergency strips along the floors discovered their purpose and glowed like quiet vowels along a hallway sentence. Phones performed their small apocalypse. Some blinked to gray. Some pretended stoicism. The network thinned until even email lost its cheerfulness. In the lobby, a murmur rose. Stranded couriers, salaried worry. The soft panic of people unused to walking through uncertainty without headphones. Facilities executed the plan. Cots arrived like folded promises. Full water jugs rolled in their blue bodies like planets. A security guard whose sternness had once been a uniform began to tell jokes the way people throw blankets, without delicacy but with good intention. HR printed signs in font sizes that apologized less. If you cannot get home, you can stay. If you are scared, tell someone who looks like they will listen. If you need medication stored, we have a refrigerator that still believes in electricity. On floor 49, the conference room became a room. The kind that understands living people instead of the kind that hosts concepts about them. Lila moved to the window and drew a circle in the fog her breath made on the glass. It looks like the sky forgot the city, she said, not sad, merely reporting. It remembers, Gabriel answered. It's just writing a long sentence right now. The door opened and Lena slipped in with a stack of papers, her eyes already calculating what compassion would require of her calendar. Sir, she said. Legal is on the satellite line. They want to know if you still intend to execute the acquisition today. If we miss the window, we slip 2 weeks. The sellers will. She looked at Clara and Lila and folded the rest of her sentence back into her mouth. We'll sign after, Gabriel said. After what? After we make sure we know how many people will sleep here tonight. Legal will object, she warned softly. Good, he said. They're paid to. It will keep them warm. Downstairs, someone in a wool coat designed for photographs and not for snow objected loudly enough that Marble took offense. Is this a shelter or a headquarters? He demanded. I need to get to my car. Who's in charge? Security nodded toward the facilities chief, who nodded toward the CEO who had just refused to take a phone call about millions of dollars because cots were being unfolded. I am, Gabriel said, arriving as if the building had lifted him to the necessary place. He spoke without performance. In this weather, it's both. If you have somewhere safe within walking distance, we'll send someone with you. If you don't, we have blankets and soup that doesn't ask your title first. The man calmed the way people do when clarity holds the door. He took a blanket from a box he would have ignored last week and thanked a person whose name he had never planned to learn. Money when frightened becomes polite. Dignity when offered correctly becomes contagious. The first true conflict did not arrive as a headline. It came as a whispered policy. HR, conscientious and frightened, brought a folder to the 49th floor labeled Liability in Emergency Accommodations. Inside it were sentences meant to defend the company from the consequences of kindness. We need signatures, the director said gently, from anyone staying. Waivers. Acknowledgements. It's standard. Gabriel took the folder. The pages were honest in their own vocabulary. Injury, indemnify, hold harmless, act of God. He pictured a line of frightened people signing their names under a phrase that asked them to absolve a building for allowing them to be safe. He felt his jaw become the tool his father never taught him to use. A hinge for no. Not tonight, he said. We will not make people sign permission to be human. Sir, if someone falls. If someone falls, he answered. We will pick them up and then examine the floor, not the pen. The HR director, who had come up through an industry that treats humans like complicated cargo, exhaled a breath she did not know she had been holding. I'll adjust, she said, and left lighter than she arrived. Policies can be forgiven for forgetting their parents are people. By 5, the building had a new music. The lobby held families with bags that told the truth about their budgets. A nurse from a clinic 2 blocks away had walked in with 2 elderly patients because the clinic's heat believed in summer. A pair of cooks from a restaurant that had run out of customers came bearing pots like saints in an old story. The cafe manager opened his registers and waved away money with the grace of someone who had always wanted to be this person and now had permission. Lila discovered a committee of children near the security desk. In disasters, children form governments faster than adults. Someone produced crayons from a purse that had always carried crayons. Someone else established a trading system that rewarded stickers with stars. The guard who had been practicing jokes appointed himself minister of tape and used it to hang a paper banner that said camp here in handwriting that had been retired too early. Plants know which way to grow, Lila told him gravely, indicating the windows. They go toward the light. Then we'll put the cots where the lamps are. Then we'll put the cots where the lamps are, he replied and meant it. Upstairs, the mother's fever, quiet all afternoon out of consideration, remembered its vocation. Clara's face lost the small reserves of color the soup had donated. She steadied herself on the chair and pretended not to need steadying. I'm fine, she said, because that is the sentence the poor are trained to say even to people who have just offered them rest. You're not, Gabriel answered. He signaled with a hand that had learned commands in boardrooms and was relearning requests. We have a clinic on 23. The nurse in charge terrifies even doctors. Let her terrify us into doing this correctly. They rode the stairs because elevators sulk in storms. On 23, a woman with a braid that looked like a manifesto took Clara's temperature and hummed as if to set a metronome inside the panic. She asked questions in a language that wrapped dignity around symptoms. You've carried too much, the nurse said to Clara, and the diagnosis landed heavier than the fever. We'll ease it. You'll rest here while your daughter runs a government downstairs. Work, Clara began. We'll exist tomorrow, the nurse cut in. For tonight, the only job is to let your body stop apologizing. Gabriel stepped back to the door. He remembered the shelter nurse who had once taught his mother how to breathe through a panic that arrived like creditors. He remembered the hand on his 9-year-old head, brief, businesslike, the way you pat a dog that will not belong to you but deserves acknowledgement. He left Clara in that competence and returned to the lobby's parliament. On the landing he stopped. There are moments when the building you own no longer looks like an object. It looks like a person humming to itself. Cots made formal rose like a ceremony managed by benevolence. A whiteboard accumulated names that sounded like maps of a city you can only see from inside it. Someone at the piano, a piano, who had purchased a lobby piano, played the kind of chords that agree to stay in the background while everyone else finds out they can sing. He did not sing. He moved like quiet management through a floor that had learned to be generous. He asked questions like a person who expected answers that needed no defense. He noted where the draft from the southern doors made its argument and had blankets relocated to reply. He watched the generators shift tone and felt gratitude for machines, which do not require applause to maintain their promises. At 6, the satellite line found him again. Legal had threaded through the weather a cable made of stubbornness. If we do not sign within the hour, the voice said, the sellers will take their dance to another ballroom. There are cots in ours, he replied. Sir, I must advise. Advise me after the storm, he said. Tonight the only acquisition we'll be proud of is blankets. He could feel the future shaking its head at him. Articles about fiduciary duty, think pieces about softness, boardrooms sharpening their smiles the way hunters sharpen knives. He pictured it and was not frightened. There are men who spend their lives manufacturing storms so they never have to feel the weather. He had been one of them. Tonight he preferred the honest weather. A child, smaller than Lila, all eyes, her coat a size too brave, approached him as if he were a counter at which a question could be exchanged for a solution. Sir, she asked, is this your house? It is tonight, he said. Then can you make it stop buzzing? She asked, pointing up to where the generators complained like old neighbors. No, he said. But I can make sure the buzzing keeps us warm. She nodded as if approving a budget. Okay, she said, and joined Lila's government with the authority of someone who has just granted permission to a man in a suit. At 7:30, a roomer arrived wearing a name. Victor Mullen, the largest outside investor, had braved the weather to reach the building. He entered wearing fur that remembered a different century, shook snow from shoulders like a dog that has never known a leash, and frowned at cots as if they were typographical errors. He found Gabriel near the piano where chords were preventing hysteria and smiled thinly. Gabriel, he said, I admire improvisation, but I do not fund it. We are sheltering people, Victor. You are sheltering liability, he corrected, glancing at HR who refused to be glanced into apology. We will be sued for compassion. Then we will be sued, Gabriel said. And I will enjoy explaining to a jury that our crime was blankets. Victor stepped closer, voice low enough to pretend intimacy. You were a poet at 28 when I backed you. You are a poet again at 52. The market prefers prose. Sign the papers. Close the deal. Then play savior if you must. It would have been easier to say yes. Yes keeps storms away when they come from men. But outside, weather gripped the city as if reminding it that power uses many voices. Not tonight, Gabriel said. Tonight we make a building behave. Victor's eyes hardened the way ice teaches water to forget flexibility. The board will remember, he said, and left with the dramatic swirl of a man who believes exits are acts of theater. Gabriel watched him go and felt, somewhere beneath the sternum where boys keep their old promises, a small calm take a chair. He did not know how long it would stay, he only knew it had earned its seat. At 8, an alarm manufactured urgency on the 30th floor. A stuck elevator between 29 and 30, car 2, 6 occupants, one of them very small if the voices were to be believed. Facilities ran. Security ran. The building held its breath. Gabriel and Lena reached the landing where a panel blinked uncertainty, and an engineer knelt with tools that had names like solutions. We have comms, the engineer said, pressing a button that turned metal into a tin can telephone. Car 2, we hear you. A man's voice tried for calm and succeeded at first draft. We're okay. It's warm enough. There's a child. A smaller voice rose. It's dark where the buttons are. It's okay, the engineer said. We're going to open a door in a minute and teach this elevator what teamwork is. Is the CEO there? The child asked, because children do not believe in chains of command built on job titles. They believe in the nearest grown-up who admits responsibility. I am, Gabriel said, crouching to get nearer to the little tin can that his own childhood would have trusted. What's your name? Amara, the voice said, confident in darkness in a way some adults never learn. Amara, he said, I need a helper inside. Can you be my helper? Yes, she said, as if the building had been waiting to ask. Good. Put your hand flat on the door. Feel me knocking. He tapped 3 times. The engineer listening smiled at the choreography of reassurance. We're here. We won't go away. I'm going to count to 30 with you. That's the time it takes for smart people to do something brave. Ready? He counted. She counted. The engineer overrode, reset, coaxed, swore in a dialect mechanical things respect. On 27 the system remembered it had been built by mortals and obeyed. The door parted 2 inches, then 4, then a reluctant 8, as if conceding that cooperation can be taught. Faces appeared as if surfacing from a deep pool. Adults with gratitude already preparing to apologize. A child with hair haloed by static and eyes that preferred stories with good endings. One by one, with a professionalism invented for that minute, they were helped to the landing and then to a bench that had never felt so useful. Amara stepped out last and regarded the CEO with the audit children conduct without legal training. You counted right, she said. I had help, he answered, and pointed to her head the way doctors do when they want to honor the brain but not frighten it. When it was over, when the door agreed to be a door again, applause rolled down the stairwell and found its way into corners that had not clapped in years. The engineer pretended to hate it and did not. The building relaxed, the way animals do after a sudden noise leaves. Night deepened. The power held. He walked. He checked. He asked. He listened. He discovered that listening is the only skill that scales. He made a list in his head of what tomorrow would require. Portable heaters for corners the drafts loved. A budget line that would be moved from celebration to preparation. A call to legal about writing a policy that permitted mercy without turning it into theater. He rehearsed the conversation with Victor and found he was not angry. Anger would be a costume now. Truth preferred plainer clothes. At 10 the building slept the way a camp sleeps. One ear open, one eye pretending. He found a quiet hallway where the emergency lights made a kind of patient dawn. Through a window he watched snow fall with the soft tyranny of accumulation. He reached into his pocket and found the envelope he had been carrying for days. The one not on company letterhead. The one he had addressed to no one because the recipient had not yet declared herself. He opened it and reread the few words a man writes when he is trying not to let his sentences outrun his sincerity. I am learning that leadership is the ability to make rooms breathe. Thank you for reminding me that buildings are lungs, not trophies. Gee, he had meant the note for Clara and had been waiting for a minute that did not look like pity dressed as generosity. Tonight was too dramatic. Tomorrow would be better. He sealed it again and put it back into his pocket, letting restraint be its own offering. He returned to the conference room where, earlier, soup had defeated a corner of winter. Lila had claimed a couch by turning it into a fort respectful of architecture. Books from the lobby shelf, real heavy, indifferent, and smuggled under cushions. She sat up when he entered, hair refusing to behave, eyes alert but softened by the hour. "Plants," he said, pointing to the plastic folder. "You promised me a demonstration." She grinned. "I can show you tomorrow. They need light. We'll loan them some." "Did you know," she said, yawning mid-lecture, "that if you turn a plant around it gets confused for a bit and then forgives you?" "I have known very few beings that generous," he said. "Mom says people are like that," she added, sliding back under the fort. "If you turn them around too fast, they get dizzy and then mad, but later they grow toward light again if you let them." He sat in the chair beside the fort as if posted on watch. "Your mother is correct," he said, and wondered whether he could grow faster than the light required. Midnight arrived without permission. Outside, wind kept practicing until perfection exhausted it. Inside, the building held its little republic and dreamed soft, practical dreams, of thermostats that behaved, of draftless doors, of vending machines that understood crisis. He dozed and woke and dozed again to the small sounds buildings make when they decide to be kind, the hush of blankets being adjusted, the sigh of feet relieved from their obligations, the useful cough of boilers believing. Around 2 the generators hiccuped. The lights dimmed to a seriousness that asked to be heard. He stood, listened to the mechanical floor the way men once listened to horses, and considered contingencies like a card player who has finally learned the game is not about winning but about playing so others may continue to play. He found the facilities chief again, his hands black with the religion of machines. "She'll hold," the man said, thumping a panel with affection. "But she wants tribute." "What kind?" "Promise we won't forget her when the sun returns." "Done," Gabriel said. "She gets a new sibling in spring." "Name her after me," the chief grinned, and the joke was more prayer than humor. At 4 the storm softened. At 5, the sky behind the snow admitted there had always been a color it meant to show again. At 6 children began to wake like lit windows. Adults sat up, rearranged dignity, recalibrated gratitude to avoid debt. Coffee arrived tasting like redemption. The building smelled faintly of breakfast, relief, and the paper smell of policies about to be rewritten. By 7, city text messages ventured optimism. Transit would creep. Schools would rehearse delayed openings. The grid would apologize with the self-importance of something that knows it is both invisible and indispensable. He watched people pack their bags in their humility. He watched them fold blankets the way good guests do even when the host is a corporation. He watched security hold doors and nurses give last instructions and the whiteboard erase itself with reluctance. He stood at the lobby threshold as people thanked him for a thing he had not done alone. "Tell the building," he said, and meant it. They laughed and did, patting walls as if masonry could register gratitude, and perhaps it can. When most had gone, when only those who lived at distances incompatible with daylight remained, he returned to the clinic on 23. Clara slept, not the shallow defensive sleep of poverty but a sleep that knew it was being guarded. The nurse looked up and lowered her voice. "She'll manage," she said. Fever broke like pride. "Let her keep the blanket. It likes her." He left the envelope on the bedside table where a person would find it and not a policy. He did not add money. Money would come in its own sentences with the dignity of payroll, promotion, and time. This was not about cash. This was a sentence about air. He walked to his office through a building still warm with borrowed humanity. On his desk, the acquisition papers waited, impatient, important, unashamed of their priorities. He signed them because commerce would resume and his company would feed families that do not know his name. He signed them knowing the signature was cleaner today because it had been delayed for blankets. At 9, Victor called to inform him that a board meeting had been scheduled to discuss his diversionary management. At 9:02, Lena knocked to inform him the media had learned of the cots and the piano and the soup and the elevator rescue with the counting. "They're calling it the night the tower breathed," she said, half laughing at the inevitability that people will put poetry on things when you least expect it. "Let them," he said. "Maybe it will remind us." He looked down at the city that had survived another argument with weather. The streets shone with the humility that follows public difficulty. People moved with the gentleness emergencies teach for a little while before old habits reclaim their podium. He pressed his palm to the glass and felt nothing but cool engineered to impersonate invulnerability. Inside, he felt warmth that had not belonged to him 24 hours earlier. Conflict had not ended. It had clarified. He knew there would be a price. There always is when you interrupt the liturgy of efficiency with the heresy of care. Investors would accuse him of smuggling softness into strategy. The board would wonder why their returns were being amended by soup. Legal would insist on new paragraphs. But last night a building had learned to breathe, and a city had borrowed breath, and a child had counted to 30 with a man who had always been impatient. 17 pages, he murmured to himself with a tired smile, thinking of the way life sometimes quantifies what only the heart can compute. 17 good pages. He sat, picked up his pen again, and began to write the next policy himself, not in legalese but in human. In any emergency, our first obligation is air. If there is breath to be offered, we will offer it, and account for it later without apology. He placed it where someone would find it who needed permission to be brave. Outside, sun pried a finger under the horizon. Inside, the tower held the shape of a night it would not forget. And somewhere between a fort made of chairs and a clinic that smelled of competence, a child slept beside her mother. Both of them turned toward the light even before the light fully arrived. He had thought power was the ability to make rooms obey. Last night taught him the truer definition, the power to make rooms humane, and to pay the price without resentment. Morning did not arrive. It confessed. The storm's fist unclenched into open palms of light, and the city remembered how to move like itself, stiff at first, then loosening, then pretending it had never forgotten. Inside the tower warmth lingered in places spreadsheets never measure, in the wrinkle of a blanket someone folded carefully though no one asked. In the note a child taped to the whiteboard that said, in pencil too hard for paper's patience, thank you for letting the building be a house. Gabriel Harlow read those words as if they were a verdict. He looked less like a CEO and more like a man who had slept in a chair he refused to admit was comfortable. His tie was an afterthought. His cufflinks had forgiven his forgetfulness. His face carried the fine prints of a night that had traded certainty for usefulness. Sir, Lena said gently from the doorway. The board moved the emergency session up 30 minutes. He nodded without looking away from the whiteboard. In the blank corner someone had drawn a plant in a paper cup reaching toward a crude sun. The arrow above it read, "This is how." He closed his eyes and heard a small voice counting to 30 in the elevator shaft, felt the building's generators breathe like patient animals, smelled soup and wet wool and clean coffee that believed in mornings again. Then he opened his eyes on a different weather, the one men bring to rooms when they say the word governance like it is a confession none of them intend to make. Send them the deck, he said, and the word deck felt like a stranger in his mouth. No slides about last night. I will not put blankets in bullet points. Lena hesitated. There's media on line 3. Every outlet you can name and 2 you can't. Headlines range from poetic to petty. Night the tower breathed is leading. CEO chooses soup over shareholders is catching up. Let them fight, he said quietly. The news loves a civil war in a single man. He straightened his jacket, not for vanity but as soldiers once straightened uniforms when the day insisted on being difficult. He slipped a small, unaddressed envelope into his pocket with the muscle memory of someone who had carried more fragile things toward their rightful homes. On floor 41, the boardroom looked like it had been grown from a single tree that believed in obedience. The table shone with that particular arrogance money can lacquer onto wood. The chairs were designed to hold posture captive and then convince it the cage was a compliment. Faces waited. Victor Mullen and his wintersport wealth, 2 directors who measured risk with scales that had never been calibrated to measure grief. An older woman with the eyes of someone who had raised a family and a fund at the same time. A younger one who had survived a decade many men did not notice had knives in it. The general counsel cleared his throat with the crispness of a doctor ordering quiet before a surgery. Gentlemen, ladies, we are convened to discuss yesterday's deviation from protocol and the CEO's subsequent refusal to prioritize the closing over the sheltering of non-employees inside our premises. Victor steepled fingers like cathedrals. Language, Henry. He did a noble thing. Nobility is not a thesis. It's a poem. I do not invest in poems. Then you invested in the wrong man. the older woman said mildly. I's never leaving Gabriel, he has always been 12% poem. Laughter scattered like a handful of coins. Some landed, some rolled under chairs. Gabriel waited for silence to remember its duty, then spoke without slides, without the armor of numbers. We built a building that could withstand wind, he said. Last night the city asked if it could also withstand need. We said yes. We will say it again. Our policy was written by weather that came from spreadsheets. I am rewriting it with weather that came from a real window. Victor leaned back. And the acquisition? I signed at dawn, Gabriel answered. With coffee and gratitude. Our growth did not starve because we fed people soup. Your timing shaved points off our leverage, Victor pressed. Then the buyer's leverage required the wrong hunger, Gabriel replied. A silence you could count took a seat. The younger director, Arya Khan, who had made her first fortune by refusing to answer questions she wasn't asked, spoke softly. What did the night cost us? He knew she meant money and not money both. Cots and generators and something we'll call goodwill until we find a better word. Overnight security overtime. Kitchen wages. Policy some will dislike. Headlines that take a breath for us and against us. And what did it buy? She asked. He looked out the window because some words prefer to be gazed at while you say them. It bought the right to call ourselves a company that deserves to exist. Victor's smile tried to cut and failed. Poetry again. Breathing, he corrected. Breathing isn't poetry. It's a policy. The General Counsel shuffled papers with the guilt of someone about to say sensible things at the wrong time. We should expect a wave of attention. Opportunities for branding, yes, but also attention from people who litigate compassion into liability. And Victor is right that the timing of the deal will affect our post-close narrative. We must anticipate activist investors. Then let them activate, Gabriel said. They will find me awake. The older woman, Eleanor, folded her hands in the way grandmothers fold letters after reading bad news and deciding the news will not be given the last word. Are you prepared to defend this posture? She asked. Not just last night. Next time. And the time after that, when it's less picturesque and more expensive. Yes, he said. But I do not intend to defend it. I intend to normalize it. Defenses are for people breaking rules. We are writing them. Victor sighed like the weather. We built this house to keep the storm out. Then perhaps, Eleanor said, turning to him, we should also build it to let people in. The vote was a theater with real consequences. It would not remove him, not yet. He had built too much architecture to be replaced by mood. But it would signal the price of air. 3 votes leaned toward reprimand disguised as guidance. 2 leaned toward applause disguised as caution. Eleanor and Arya refused to be categories. The motion finally recorded a compromise board's love when courage makes them itchy, a formal review of emergency protocols, a committee with a name that could live on a plaque, a request less request than order, that the CEO refrain from unilateral enactments that expose the corporation to unquantified risk. I'll bring you quantified risk, he said, and unquantifiable returns. Victor left first, gathering his coat like impatience. Do not make a habit of interrupting profit with conscience, he murmured as he passed. The market will permit 1 confession per decade. The market can write me a schedule if it wishes, Gabriel replied. I'll pin it to the generator we're buying this spring. When they were gone, when the table remembered how to be wood again, he sat alone with the quiet Arya had left for him on purpose. It was not pity. It was room. He found Clara on 23 sitting up, the blanket around her shoulders like a treaty. She read the note he had left and looked at him with an expression that made him wish he had learned humility younger. You didn't have to write this, she said. I did, he answered. Otherwise I would not have been able to think. She folded the note carefully, as if the paper had bones. I used to clean buildings at night, she said, voice steady as a hallway. In one of them, the thermostat was set by a man who never came after 6. The building was cold because the person who could change it believed it would be empty. It wasn't empty. It had cleaners and delivery men, and the woman who made sure the morning coffee machine would not embarrass anyone. Last night you remembered we exist after 6. He felt an old apology without a clear address rise and sit in his throat. I forgot for too long. You were busy becoming, she said, and made forgiveness look like common sense. Lila appeared in the doorway with a paper cup of orange juice she had elevated to ceremony. "They're dismissing school late," she announced. "Our teacher says to write about a time the world felt different and you were in the room." I can write about whatever made your heart louder," Clara answered. "Then I'll write about the elevator," Lila declared. "And how counting can rescue people." She looked up at Gabriel. "Who taught you to be kind?" The question landed like a bell. He did not answer immediately because the first thing his mouth wanted to do was lie politely and say my mother. His mother had taught him many good things, but kindness had not been one the world had allowed her to afford in the currency of time. "A coach," he said finally. "He bought me shoes and called it a reward so I didn't have to be embarrassed. And a nurse who taught my mother to breathe through panic without telling the whole room she was afraid. And a woman who, in a lobby last night, ate soup first and thanked me second." Lila regarded this with the seriousness children reserve for taxonomy. "Then I will also write that soup can teach a building a lesson." He smiled. "Please do." At noon the media became inevitable. The PR team asked whether they might let cameras into the lobby to capture the afterglow of humanity like it was safe sunlight. "No," he said. "Not yet. We are not going to audition for sainthood." Instead he walked downstairs where the pianist from the night, who turned out to be the receptionist's cousin, was still coaxing the keys into optimism. He placed a hand on the piano lid in thanks and moved on. An email from an address he had not seen in 23 years arrived, chaperoned by fate and spam filters that had decided, against protocol, to let this one through. It was from the shelter director. Not the one from his childhood. Time has the decency to retire saints, but a younger woman who had inherited her office's old ghosts. "Someone sent me the news, Mr. Harlow. I don't imagine you remember me. I was the volunteer with the short braid who once chased you down the block because you left your notebook. Last night looked like the day you told me you'd buy a building someday and make it behave. You did. If you want to come by, the thermostat's never right, but we have coffee that tries." He stared at the words until the white behind them brightened. The past had a way of sending invitations disguised as corrections. He wrote back with economy and honesty. "I remember the notebook. I forgot the vow. I'd like to visit." He told Lena to cancel his lunch with the banker who loved expensive adjectives. He switched his shoes for once his feet could forgive. He walked because cars in the city after a storm behave like opinion columns, mostly noise. The shelter had been sandblasted by years and painted by volunteers. It wore its grief and its grace without makeup. The lobby still smelled like lemon cleaner and coffee that meant it. A child raced past him with a jacket too large and a mission too urgent to explain. He felt the gravity of 30 years collapse the distance between boy and man. The director greeted him with a hug that was not for publicity. "You were always going to be trouble," she said, laughing. "The good kind." He smiled in a way he did not have to manage. "I brought something the generator will like." He handed her a promise, a donation that came with a schedule written in logistics, not just zeros. "Thank you," she said, the words not cheapened by repetition. "But I'm greedy. I want something else." "What?" "Your face here occasionally. The kids think rich people are ideas, not bodies." He looked past her at a bulletin board with flyers for free tax prep and flu shots and a poetry night that stubbornly insisted on happening monthly. He nodded. "I owe the air interest." He found himself in a familiar hallway of cots that did not belong to Storms and a door that creaked like memory. A boy sat cross-legged on the floor turning a sneaker in his hands the way archaeologists turn relics. He had taped the sole. The tape had opinions. "That never holds," Gabriel said, crouching beside him. "You need glue. Glue costs $5. The boy answered with the precision of someone who had learned economies without a class. Gabriel did what the coach had done for him without making the boy memorize the debt, wrote a number on a card, handed it to the director with a nod, and said to the boy, "Tomorrow your shoes will speak softer." "You a donor?" the boy asked, not impolite, merely practical. "I'm a man who got helped and never paid the bill," Gabriel said. On his way out, he stood again in the lobby and looked at the sign that had been there when he was 9, the one with rules that existed for everyone's safety and almost never for anyone's comfort. He used to hate that sign. Today he read it like a poem about boundaries that intended mercy. He left with coffee that tried and gratitude that did not perform. Back at the tower, Victor's email waited with a subject line that believed in thunder. Fall in line. He read it with the patience of men who used to box and now prefer to talk. He replied with something worse than defiance to a man like Victor. A plan. He proposed a formal emergency humanity protocol funded by 1% of their celebratory budget, a generator purchase schedule, contracts with local shelters, and an employment pipeline for the literacy program Clara had brought into his building like contraband hope. He copied the board. He attached numbers that behaved beautifully. He named the fund the airline because the older words mercy charity came with too many dishonest decorations. Arya responded within minutes. I'll vote yes. Send me the draft. I'll add teeth so kindness can bite back. Eleanor followed. The plaque can say Committee on Rooms That Breathe. I refuse any title with the word optics. He exhaled. Progress distributes itself like candles. You do not need the sun to behave when wax learns its work. At 3, the school called to say Lila had turned in an essay titled How Counting to 30 opened an elevator and requested permission to include the CEO's first name, because last names make essays nervous. He said yes and asked the teacher to send him a copy, not for the press kit, but because he wanted to be able to read it on days investors asked him to translate poems into profit. At 4, a courier delivered a box that had traveled the city with more care than most apologies. Inside lay the coach's shoes, the brand and model long retired, replicated by a cobbler who did not usually take sentimental commissions. Lena had arranged it while others arranged consequences. There was a note. For a man whose feet have further to go. He touched the leather and felt foolish and forgiven. He placed them under his desk like a relic of a secular saint, a reminder that progress wears laces. Evening folded the day into a quieter shape. The tower learned the new temperature of itself. On the way out, he paused at the lobby piano where the receptionist's cousin played a tune that might have been Chopin or might have been the sound a room makes when it is relieved. He reached into his pocket for the envelope meant for Clara and changed his mind. He would give it to her when applause had left the building, when cameras had forgotten the address, when kindness could arrive without a shadow. He stepped into the night, which had retired from drama and returned to its usual duties. The city smelled like thaw and bus breaks and the clean breath of people who had survived something together, and would now go back to pretending they survive alone. He walked 3 blocks without his coat buttoned and did not shiver. He felt the decision he had made harden into a habit under his ribs. He understood that habits write men, and men write policies, and policies change whether a child knows what a generator is. When he reached the corner where the storm had piled itself into history, he stopped. Across the street, a woman in a thin jacket argued with a door that had closed 5 minutes early. Inside, a clerk shrugged the shrug of underpaid authority. He crossed, opened his wallet, and no, he did not buy. He stood there until the clerk looked up and recognized the kind of attention that writes emails to managers. The door opened. The woman entered. He stepped back into the stream of ordinary people, anonymous and exact. He did not feel heroic. He felt busy becoming. Back in his apartment, a space designed by a person who believed silence equals luxury, he did a disobedient thing. He called his mother. Her voice arrived over distance like it always had, practical, warm, and studded with memories neither of them had enough hands to hold. Heard about your building, she said, pretending she did not keep tabs on him with a network of women who exchange more intelligence than investors ever will. You finally did what you promised by the vending machines. He laughed through something that wanted to be a different sound. I forgot I promised. I didn't, she said. I was paying attention to whether you would keep it. Did I? For one night, she answered. Now make it a habit, or you'll grow brittle and call it wisdom. They spoke of small things then, weather that had apologized, recipes that had forgiven mistakes, neighbors who kept the hallway plants alive. When they hung up, he sat in a room that had heard confessions less useful than this one and breathed like a building that had learned how. On his nightstand he placed 3 objects in a row, the piano's lingering chord inside his ear, the coach's replicated shoes, and the paper house Lila had left, the one labeled someday. He whispered to the house without meaning to, we are getting there. He slept. In his dream the tower did not loom. It lifted. The boardroom didn't argue, it asked better questions. The elevator did not trap, it introduced people to one another on purpose. The lobby piano accompanied the counting to 30. And somewhere between floors, a child's voice said again, "Who taught you to be kind?" And this time he answered in a list long enough to be a lineage: a coach, a nurse, a receptionist, a cousin, a janitor, a director with winter in her eyes and spring in her vote, a girl with a ribbon, and a woman who slept on a clinic cot without apologizing. When he slept on a clinic cot without apologizing. When he woke, Dawn watched him with the polite curiosity of a city willing to try again. The board's conditional tolerance becomes a fuse. Victor spins an internal vote, media digs into Gabriel's past, and a rumor threatens Clara's job. Meanwhile, Lila's essay goes viral, not for the tower, but for a line about people who open doors without asking your name. Gabriel must choose publicly, protect his profits or protect the people who taught him to breathe. The morning paper arrived before dawn, but Gabriel didn't have to read it. He felt it. The city, which had praised him for turning a building into a house, now wanted to know how much the wallpaper cost. The front page was a mirror with teeth, his face under a headline that tried to sound analytical but dripped curiosity like ink. The man who let strangers sleep in his tower, hero or liability. Below it, a photo captured him standing beside the piano, the light behind him bending like reverence. The caption read, "A CEO's compassion puts his company at risk." Risk. The word that money uses when it sees a reflection of humanity it can't price. By 9 a.m., the news cycle had turned into scripture. Talk shows debated the cost of kindness. Analysts dissected empathy as if it were a quarterly report. Half the world adored him. The other half demanded to see receipts. In every studio they said the same thing: he broke the rules that built him. In the tower's lobby, where blankets had been folded back into boxes, reporters pressed cameras to glass like children at aquariums. Their questions came muffled but relentless. "Mr. Harlow, do you regret it? Will you step down? Was it a PR stunt?" Even the marble seemed to want to answer for him. He walked past them silently, the way one walks through a storm already spent. Inside, the board waited, not in person but as faces on a screen grid. Each window glowed with a different version of concern. At the center of the mosaic sat Victor Mullen, immaculate, predatory, smiling with the cold pride of a man who believes consequences are collectibles. "Gabriel," Victor began, "you've become the story. That's never good business. You've compromised the brand and blurred our value proposition." Gabriel looked straight into the camera. "If the value proposition can't survive compassion, we're selling the wrong thing." Victor chuckled softly. "You've turned into a philosopher. Investors don't fund philosophers. They fund predictability." "Then maybe they should stop pretending they fund innovation," Gabriel said. A silence unfolded like a flag. The others watched, some fascinated, some frightened. The older director, Eleanor, spoke gently. "Gabriel, the world's watching. If you lean into the story, you might own it. If you hide, they'll write it for you." He nodded. "Then I'll speak. But not about optics. About origin." That afternoon, the company's PR department booked him on the largest financial network in the country. The host was known for smiling with her mouth and attacking with her eyes. Her show's title, Power Hour, blinked across the screen like neon irony. When the red light went on, she began politely. "Mr. Harlow, millions were moved by your decision to open your doors during the storm. But some say it was reckless, illegal even. You endangered company assets. Was it worth it?" He leaned forward. "Ma'am, I spent half my life protecting assets while forgetting I was one. So yes, it was worth it." She paused, disarmed by simplicity. "But shareholders," he interrupted, "trusted me to lead. Leadership isn't measured by quarterly returns. It's measured by who still has a roof when the quarter ends." The room fell silent for 2 beats longer than television allows. Off camera, producers gestured wildly for her to pivot. "Are you saying," she asked carefully, "that compassion belongs in business models?" "I'm saying," Gabriel replied, "that if it doesn't, we shouldn't call it business. We should call it extraction." The clip spread faster than the storm itself. Within hours, the phrase "compassion belongs in business" trended across the digital sky like a new constellation. People stitched it into captions, into sermons, into walls. For every voice that praised him, another called him naive. But somewhere in between cynicism and faith, people started looking at their own offices, their own bosses, their own unbreathing rooms and asking, could we? At home, the silence waited like an old friend. He turned on the television once, only to watch a panel of men who'd never built anything but sentences discuss whether he'd lost his edge. One said softly, "Empathy is good pure until it isn't." Another nodded, "He'll apologize by Friday." He turned it off. Instead, he opened his email. There it was, a subject line that didn't know. Lila Wynn essay submission. He clicked it open. The file was a photograph, scanned from notebook paper lined with effort. Her handwriting wobbled in brave sincerity. The night the lights went out, our city forgot it was made of people. But one building remembered. A man counted to 30 with a little girl in an elevator, and when the door opened, everyone remembered how to breathe. I think leadership means opening doors without asking names first. My mom says the building was tall before, but now it's big. At the bottom, the teacher's red note. Beautiful work, Lila. Can we share this? He didn't know how the essay leaked, but within hours, it traveled across screens faster than policy ever could. The phrase big, not tall became the anthem. A journalist called it the new gospel of leadership. Someone printed it on posters. Schools discussed it. Parents read it aloud to their children. And buried under all that noise, one question rose quietly like the sound of truth finding its feet. Who is Lila Wynn? By nightfall, the answer found the world before the world found grace. A smaller outlet, hungry for scandal, published a story titled, "Inside the CO Storm Night, the Mother, the Child, and the Job That Wasn't Posted." They implied favoritism, questioned hiring ethics, hinted at manipulation. They showed pictures of Clara leaving the tower, her eyes red from the cold, Lila's hand in hers. The world that had celebrated now sniffed blood. The comments turned cruel. Words like fraud, charity case, cover-up filled timelines faster than reason could defend itself. That night, Clara called him, not as an employee, but as a woman trying not to sound afraid. "Mr. Harlow," she whispered. "They've been outside our building since noon." Lila's school called. "She's scared." "I'll handle it," he said. "You've done enough." "No," he replied. "Not yet." At dawn, he arrived at her apartment before the press did. Coffee in one hand, an apology in the other. The neighborhood was small, the kind that wore its exhaustion like pride. A cracked sidewalk led to a door painted with stubborn cheer. Inside, the walls were lined with drawings that could have been dreams or distractions. Lila ran to him. "Mom says they think we cheated." He knelt to her level. People who haven't been helped forget what it looks like. They mistake kindness for favor. She frowned. "Can you tell them?" "I can tell them," he said. "But they'll only believe you." She thought about that. "Then I'll tell them too." At noon he stood before the press again, no stage, no PR team. The city square buzzed with static humanity. Cameras blinked like insects hungry for light. "Yesterday," he began, "someone called me a liability. Maybe they're right. If being liable means being responsible for others, then I am. And if helping a child and her mother was a violation, then compassion is guilty. I won't apologize for that." A reporter shouted, "Did you know them personally before the storm?" "No," Gabriel said. "But I've known people like them all my life. People who build this city while it pretends not to notice." He gestured to the crowd. "I hired Clara Wynn because she was qualified. I met her daughter because the world isn't." What happened next wasn't strategy, it was memory. A pause, heavy and honest. Then in the back of the crowd, a child's voice. "My mom says kindness doesn't take meetings." Laughter broke like dawn through tension. Reporters turned their cameras toward the voice. Lila stood on a bench, ribbon shining, her hand gripping Clara's. She looked at Gabriel, then at the cameras. "We didn't cheat. We helped each other breathe." The silence that followed was sacred. It was the kind of silence that rewrites headlines. That night, every station aired that single sentence. Not the accusations. Not the shouting. Just the small voice that reminded an empire what air is worth. By midnight, Victor called again. His voice was thin but controlled. "You've made a martyr out of a message," he said. "Enjoy the applause. It dies fast." Gabriel exhaled. "It's not applause I want, Victor. It's endurance. You can't run a corporation on sentiment. Then sentiment will have to learn spreadsheets," he replied and hung up. He sat at his desk staring at the city outside. The same city that once treated him as myth, now rediscovering him as man. And for the first time in decades he didn't feel alone up there. That night Lila's essay reached a classroom in Detroit, a boardroom in Berlin, and a president's morning brief. Clara received 50 job offers, all from companies desperate to borrow decency. Gabriel received hate mail, praise mail, and one short letter from a janitor he hadn't met yet. It's happening. Then I saw you carrying blankets. I tell my son that story when he thinks good men don't exist anymore. Respectfully, Mateo D. He placed the letter beside Lila's essay and the old shoes under his desk. Together, they formed the truest balance sheet he'd ever seen. Outside, the wind returned, gentler this time, like a guest who's learned manners. He watched it move through the city's glass and neon, whispering across rooftops. You opened a door and it stayed open, he whispered back. Then let them walk through. And somewhere far below, in a small apartment with a blue ribbon on the windowsill, a little girl fell asleep believing that kindness was still allowed to exist. For days after the press conference, silence moved through Gabriel's tower like a new tenant. Not the silence of absence, but the silence that follows when a song has finished and the room doesn't quite know how to go back to talking. The city had moved on. Headlines shifted from kindness to conflict, from the tower that breathed to the markets that sneezed. But inside that 49-story glass spine, echoes still lived in the walls. People walked differently. They greeted security guards by name now, left coffee on the janitor's carts, and said thank you like they meant it. Even the elevator seemed to move slower, as if giving each floor a chance to think. And yet, in the middle of that strange, peaceful hum, Gabriel felt something hollow knocking in his chest. Fame had become a mirror again. And mirrors, he'd learned, never forget what they've seen. The board had calmed. The markets had adjusted. Victor had retreated into strategic silence, waiting for him to stumble under the weight of his own myth. But Gabriel was no longer afraid of falling. He was afraid of standing still. For the first time in years, he canceled his morning meetings. He walked alone through the city instead. No driver, no phone, no noise. The winter air bit his cheeks with honesty. The streets, thawing, smelled like electricity and beginnings. He passed the old bookstore that used to sell him Escape in paperback form. The doorbell still chimed the same tired note. Inside, dust moved lazily through sunlight. He bought nothing but left a 50 under the register without a word. He didn't need more words. He needed silence to stretch around him until it told the truth. That afternoon, he found himself standing in front of the shelter again. Not the new one he'd funded, the old one. The place where he'd once learned that shame and survival share the same roof. It hadn't changed much. The same uneven tiles. The same stubborn front door that stuck before it forgave you. A hand-painted sign still hung crooked over the counter. Take what you need. Leave what you can. He walked in. The same air, bleach, coffee, fatigue, and dignity greeted him. A boy sat at the table where he once did, drawing on the back of a flyer. The same way Gabriel had done 30 years ago, sketching dreams that looked like towers. You draw good, the boy said without looking up. Gabriel smiled. You too, thanks. I'm building a spaceship. Why? Because rockets don't have rent, the boy said. And in that single sentence, Gabriel felt the decades collapse. The shelter's director found him standing there like a man who'd wandered into his own photograph. She didn't ask questions. She just poured him coffee in a chipped mug that had seen better hands. You look tired, she said. I'm not, he lied. She didn't believe him. You've been building things too long. Builders forget they were made too. He looked around. It's smaller than I remember. That's because you grew taller, she said. But maybe not yet big. He smiled faintly. A girl taught me that word last week. The director nodded. Children are better architects. They build without blueprints. They stood in silence for a while, listening to the slow laughter of the people at the tables. It wasn't joy. It was endurance finding a melody. When he left, he didn't take the car waiting outside. He walked to the edge of the river. The wind rolled off the water like forgiveness, too cold to lie but too kind to hurt. He took a deep breath, and for the first time in years, didn't hear the echo of an agenda behind it. He heard only breath, quiet, honest enough. He pulled from his coat a notebook. The same kind he'd carried as a boy, back when he thought words could build homes. On the first page he wrote, If air is free, why do we give it away so rarely? Maybe the price of success isn't failure, Maybe it's forgetting what air feels like. Tonight I remembered. He closed it, tucked it into his coat and whispered to the wind, "Keep it for me." The next day, he returned to the tower. The building still hummed, but differently now, less like a machine, more like a memory humming to itself. The staff had filled the lobby piano with notes of gratitude from the families they'd sheltered. The wall. In case of emergency, be human first. He stood there for a long time. Then he went upstairs and opened his office windows for the first time in years. Cold air spilled in, carrying the scent of something real. It touched the mahogany desk, the leather chairs, the polished trophies, all those things that had once meant victory. Now they looked like artifacts from another life. He found Clara in the hallway, returning from her lunch break. Her color was back, her steps light again. She carried files, but her shoulders were free. "How's the new project?" he asked. She smiled. "Busy. HR wants me to help design the new outreach initiative. They said I understand people who fall through the cracks. I told them that's because I've lived in them." He nodded. "You'll do fine. You'll come speak to the team?" He hesitated. "I don't know if they need my speeches anymore." "They don't," she said. "They need your presence." He understood the difference. That evening, when everyone had gone, he stayed. He turned off the lights and let the city's reflection fill the glass walls. From this high, the streets looked like veins again, the same image he'd once loved, but now it pulsed with different meaning. He saw lights flicker in apartment windows, buses crawling home, people holding bags of groceries in each other. He realized how small his empire looked from here. How vast everything else did. For years, he had wanted the city to belong to him. Now, he only wanted to belong within it. He whispered into the quiet, "Forgive me for thinking I built you. You built me. I was just late to notice." The building seemed to hum back in agreement. Later that night, he called his mother again. She didn't sound surprised. "I saw the essay," she said. "That little girl did what you've been trying to do your whole life, explain you in a paragraph." "She did," he admitted. "And she did it better. You sound different." "I think I am." "What's next, Gabriel?" He thought for a moment, then answered slowly. "I don't know. Maybe I'll start smaller. Maybe I'll try to make every room I enter breathe." She chuckled softly. "That's a good goal for a man with so many rooms." He smiled. "Then I'd better start tomorrow." The next morning he arrived early, before dawn, before the glass caught its first color. He walked through every floor, every corridor. He stopped at desks, windows, stairwells, even janitor closets, whispering little things to himself, to the walls, to the air. "Thank you. I remember. Don't forget to breathe." By the time people started arriving, he was back at the entrance. The guard smiled at him. "Morning, Mr. Harlow." He smiled back. "Just Gabriel today." The guard blinked, then grinned. "Morning, Gabriel." He stepped outside into the slow pink of sunrise. The city yawned, stretched, and began again. For the first time in his adult life, he didn't feel like he was late for something. He felt like he was exactly on time. Morning came trimmed in gold and caution. It found Gabriel Harlow at his desk with his jacket still on its hanger, tie still draped over the back of the chair. Below, the city stirred as if remembering it had a heartbeat. Above, the tower rehearsed its old discipline, the hum of servers and the quiet thrum of money. An email waited on his screen. Board of Directors. Special session, 8 a.m. The subject line had no courtesy word, no salutation. Just the sentence that decides if a man is still allowed to sign his own name. He walked to the window and let the early light touch his face. A janitor passed behind him, pushing a cart that squeaked like an old friend. Gabriel turned. "Morning, Mateo," he said. "Morning, boss." "No boss today. Just Gabriel." Mateo smiled, surprised. "Then good luck, Gabriel." He didn't ask how the man knew. Towers gossiped through their floors. The boardroom was colder than the weather outside. 12 chairs. 11 faces. One seat left empty on purpose. A symbolic gesture of neutrality that fooled no one. Victor Mullen sat at the head of the table, though it wasn't his right. Power has a way of sitting where it wants. "Let's begin," Victor said. "We're here to determine whether the events of last week constitute a breach of fiduciary duty." Fiduciary duty. The phrase was a curtain hiding the stage where morality gets quietly rewritten. Gabriel didn't bring a lawyer. He didn't bring notes. He brought the truth wrapped in calm. Proceed. The General Counsel read a statement about unapproved risk, unbudgeted expenditures, and unauthorized public representations. Each word landed like an accountant's hammer. When he finished, Victor spoke. Gabriel, you turned a corporation into a charity. You turned a CEO into a sermon. We are not built to survive as a sermon. Gabriel looked around the table. Serve. The sentence did what silence often can't. It paused the room. Eleanor leaned forward, her silver hair glowing against the wood. The employees, she said, seem changed. The building feels different. But feeling isn't a financial metric. No, Gabriel agreed. But collapse is. And kindness is cheaper than collapse. Arya Khan, her hands folded like a puzzle she already solved, asked quietly, what happens if we remove you? He smiled faintly. Then you prove that empathy was an experiment instead of an evolution. Victor shifted in his chair, annoyed by poise. This isn't about empathy. It's about control. You set a precedent that emotion can overrule governance. Governance without emotion, Gabriel replied, is architecture without air. The vote would be anonymous. It was always anonymous. The secretary passed out small cards that looked like apologies waiting to happen. Each person wrote a single word, retain or remove. When the cards were collected, the secretary stacked them like fragile bricks. One by one she read aloud. Retain. Remove. Remove. Retain. Retain. Remove. 6 votes. The tie that divides empires. The last card trembled in her hand. She turned it over. Retain. A breath escaped the room, sharp as relief, soft as disbelief. Victor's jaw tightened. You've bought yourself grace, he said. Don't spend it. Gabriel met his eyes. Grace isn't currency. It's oxygen. You either breathe it or you don't. Victor stood. The market will punish this sentimental governance. You'll see. Maybe, Gabriel said. But markets recover. Souls don't. After the meeting, Eleanor followed him into the hall. You one by one, she said. That makes it fragile. Everything worth keeping is, he answered. She smiled. You remind me of my husband when he stopped working for applause. It cost him friends and made him unforgettable. I'll take unforgettable, he said. She touched his sleeve. Just remember, miracles have maintenance schedules. Don't stop tending yours. Downstairs, employees gathered in quiet clusters, pretending to discuss deadlines but waiting for the verdict. When he appeared, the tension shifted like weather after thunder. Still here, he said, and the words landed like warmth. Applause started, not loud, not staged, but steady. The sound of loyalty being born. He raised a hand. No heroes, he said. Just humans trying to remember what the window where sunlight fell across the floor like a new map. Then let's build a place where no one forgets how. Later that day, he sat in his office. Door open, tie gone, the air moving freely again. Clara stepped in with a small envelope. What's this? He asked. She smiled. Lila's school wants to honor her essay. They're giving her an award. She wants you there. He opened the envelope. Inside was a hand-drawn invitation, crayon letters uneven and bright. Dear Mr. Harlow, come see the light we made. He laughed quietly. I'll be there. That night, he returned to the shelter to deliver a new generator and stayed for supper. Children ran between tables. Volunteers folded chairs. The director told him, You look lighter. I lost some weight, he said. The kind you can't measure. When he left, he looked up at the skyline. His tower glowed not as a monument but as a lantern. The next morning, news of the vote leaked. Headlines split again. Some called it redemption, others a reprieve. Victor issued statements about fiscal restraint. But beneath all the noise, employees knew something simple and permanent. The man at the top had chosen breath over bureaucracy and survived. The building learned the rhythm of its new heartbeat. Meetings began with gratitude instead of graphs. HR installed a quiet corner for breaks. Someone placed a potted plant near every elevator. They called them Lila's Gardens. Each one grew toward the light, stubbornly, forgivingly. When evening came, Gabriel stood at the window once more. He thought of all the votes that had ever decided his worth, investors, strangers, history. And he realized the only vote that had ever mattered was the one he'd finally cast for himself. He turned off the lights, stepped into the corridor, and walked toward the elevator. When the doors opened, he smiled at his reflection in the mirrored panel. For the first time in decades, he saw not a CEO, not a savior, not a story, just a man who had learned how to breathe. It was strange the way peace felt heavier than chaos. In the days after the vote, the tower exhaled. Meetings became smaller, conversations softer. The old tension, the hum that had once powered ambition like caffeine, had dissolved into something slower, gentler. The company was breathing, yes, but breathing comes with awareness. And awareness always costs more than ignorance. Gabriel began to notice the pauses. In the cafeteria line, when someone reached for the last muffin and offered it to the person behind them. In the stairwells where people now said good morning like it wasn't a script. Even in the boardroom where silence was no longer a threat, but an invitation. The empire he had built was changing its weather. But weather, even kind weather, carries its storms. That week, he received an invitation from the mayor's office. A ceremony recognizing acts of civic leadership during the storm. It was the kind of event he once sent a representative to. Now they wanted him personally. He hesitated. Recognition is dangerous, he told Clara when she brought the letter. Why? Because applause sounds like understanding, he said. And understanding takes longer. She tilted her head. Maybe the city needs a little noise before it listens. He smiled faintly. Then let's give it music instead. The night of the ceremony, the city hall was awash in soft light and expensive fabrics. Cameras lined the walls like obedient soldiers. Names were read, hands were shaken, and when Gabriel Harlow stepped onto the stage, the applause came reluctantly at first. Then, unexpectedly, it grew. The mayor handed him the plaque with a practiced smile. "Mr. Harlow," she said into the microphone, "for reminding us that power is only sacred when it bends toward people." He accepted the plaque but didn't hold it up. Instead, he looked out over the crowd, politicians, CEOs, journalists, all watching the man who had made kindness inconvenient. "I'm honored," he began, "but I didn't come here to be thanked. I came here to apologize." A murmur rippled through the room. Cameras leaned forward. "For years," he continued, "I built walls so high that I mistook them for safety. I thought I was protecting success. I was protecting fear. The night of the storm didn't make me a better man, it showed me the man I had stopped being. If this city wants to honor something, honor the people who reminded me that progress doesn't come from height. It comes from heart." The applause that followed was quiet at first, but real. The kind that doesn't perform. He left the plaque behind on the podium. An email from Victor arrived. 2 sentences. "Your speech was poetic. Poets don't last. Investors are restless." Gabriel typed a reply, paused, then deleted it. He'd learned that silence can be more expensive than any argument. Instead, he called Arya. "Tell me the truth," he said. "Are we losing them?" She laughed softly. "We're losing the ones who never believed in anything but profit. We'll gain the ones who understand patience. It'll hurt for a while." "I can live with hurt," he said. "I know," she replied. "That's why they can't control you anymore." In the lobby, the new initiative had begun. A literacy corner, funded by the airline program, had turned into something much larger: free evening classes, childcare for single parents, job training for people who had never walked through revolving doors without fear. The tower, once a shrine to wealth, had become a living, breathing ecosystem of second chances. Lila and Clara were there often. Lila reading stories to the smaller children, Clara helping adults fill out resumes under the warm hum of lamps. One evening, Gabriel visited quietly. No cameras, no ceremony, just the echo of learning. When Lila saw him, she ran over, waving a book. "We're reading The Giving Tree tonight," she said proudly. He nodded. "Good choice. That tree taught more about love than most men ever learn." She frowned, thoughtful. "But the tree gives everything away. Isn't that sad?" "Sometimes," he said, "you give because you have. Other times you give because it's the only way to stay alive." She thought for a long time. "So the tree didn't die?" He smiled. "No, Lila. The tree became the ground everyone stands on." That night, he returned to his office, turned off the lights, and opened the window again. The city air carried laughter, sirens, the smell of street food and rain. All the things that remind the powerful they are temporary. He pulled from his desk the letter from the shelter. the one the janitor had written. He read it again, slower this time. Then he folded it carefully and placed it inside his wallet. Not as proof but as prayer. He found the old paper house Lila had left by the ficus. Its corners were soft now, its roof bent slightly, but the word someday still glowed in pencil. He placed it on the sill beside the open window. The wind played with it gently, making it dance without tearing it apart. Something simple and devastating. He was no longer afraid of being forgotten. He was afraid of being remembered incorrectly. A week later, a letter arrived. Not from investors, not from press, but from his mother. Gabriel, when you were young you used to ask me what success feels like. I never had an answer then. But last night I watched your speech. I think success feels like the moment after you stop needing it. I'm proud of the man who learned how to stop. He sat at his desk, holding the letter until the ink smudged faintly under his thumb. Outside, the first snow began to fall again, slow and quiet, like forgiveness trying to remember its choreography. He stood, walked to the window and whispered, "You were right, Mom." I stopped. That weekend he attended Lila's award ceremony. The school gym was packed with folding chairs, paper decorations, and pride held together with tape. When Lila read her essay again, her voice trembled just enough to make the words human. The audience rose when she finished. But Gabriel didn't clap. He listened. He let the silence that followed stretch, sacred and complete. Afterward, she found him in the crowd. "Did I do okay?" she asked. He bent down. "You did what the whole city couldn't. You told the truth." Clara approached quietly. "She's still scared of crowds," she admitted. "So was I," he said. "Until I realized crowds are just people waiting for someone to remind them they're human." As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, the city lights blinked to life one by one, floor by floor. The tower glowed again, but it was different now. Not a monument. A lantern. Its glass no longer cold, its heart no longer hollow. From below it looked alive. Because it was. Gabriel stood on the street, looking up at it. He no longer saw his reflection in its glass. He saw people. Hundreds of them. Moving, working, living. He smiled. "Good," he whispered. "It's not mine anymore." The next morning he wrote one final memo. It wasn't addressed to the board or the staff or investors. It was addressed to whoever comes after me. You will inherit blueprints, not breath. The building will listen to you only if you listen first. When profit starts whispering louder than people, open a window. Let the air in. Remember, you're not here to make the tower taller. You're here to keep it big. He folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer beneath the old shoes and the letter from the janitor. There comes a day, quiet and without ceremony, when every man realizes that the building he raised has learned to stand without him. For Gabriel Harlow, that day arrived with the sound of morning sunlight leaking through blinds and the smell of coffee he didn't make himself. The tower would run fine today. The meetings would start without his nod. The signatures would flow down the pipeline of habit. And he would no longer be the heartbeat, the same view he'd once called conquest. Now it just looked like life continuing without permission. Below him, the city moved with a kind of grace that doesn't notice itself. He smiled. That was how it should be. He arrived at the tower later than usual. The security guard grinned and said, "Morning, Gabriel." "No, sir." "No, Mr. Harlow." The revolution was complete in the smallest word. Inside, the lobby was alive with quiet miracles. Someone had turned the old reception desk into a volunteer station for local charities. The piano played itself, not by automation but because someone was always sitting there now, giving the building a soundtrack. And the potted plants, Lila's gardens, had grown tall, their leaves touching the skylight as if to remind the structure that growth doesn't ask permission either. He walked slowly through the crowd of employees and visitors. Nobody stiffened when he passed anymore. They waved, they nodded, they smiled, the language of people who no longer feared hierarchy. When he reached his office, he didn't sit at the desk. He stood by the window, looking at the city below, his tower no longer an altar, but a participant. He thought of all the years he had tried to dominate this skyline, to carve his name into it. Now he only wanted to disappear into its breathing. At noon, Clara knocked softly and entered. Her eyes were bright, not with news of crisis but of peace. "Everything's running smoothly," she said. "We hit our targets. And the outreach program, it's at capacity for the next 6 months." He smiled. You'll need help. She nodded. I already promoted 2 coordinators. Both single parents. He laughed quietly. Of course you did. For a long moment, they stood in companionable silence. Clara looked around the room at the view, at the man who had once seemed unreachable. Then she said softly, You don't have to keep holding it, you know. He looked at her. Holding what? The world. It knows landed like an ending written in kindness. That afternoon, Gabriel called a meeting, his last as CEO. The staff gathered in the auditorium expecting strategy, forecasts, another speech about growth. Instead, he walked onto the stage in shirt sleeves, carrying nothing but a small box. He waited for the murmurs to fade, then spoke. Everything we've built together, he began, was once just a story I told myself, that success meant walls and height and control. Then a child walked into my boardroom and reminded me that stories can change their meaning halfway through. Today I'm stepping aside as your CEO. Not because I'm tired, but because I'm finally awake. This company doesn't need a ruler anymore. It needs a gardener. And I think you've all learned how to grow without me. A stunned quiet filled the room. He smiled, gentle and real. Before you worry, I'm not leaving. I'll still be here. Just closer to the ground floor. A ripple of laughter, nervous at first, then warm. He lifted the box slightly. Inside are a few things that belong to this company more than they ever belonged to me. He opened it. The contents were simple. The little paper house with someday written on it, the janitor's letter, the coach's replica shoes, and Lila's essay printed on good paper. These, he said, are our real assets. He placed them on the stage floor. Keep them visible. Not in a trophy case on a desk in a hallway somewhere they can keep watching us. Someone in the audience began to clap, then another and another until the room filled with sound. Not thunderous, not frantic, but steady, like the rhythm of a heart finally at rest. He nodded once, left the stage and did not look back. The next morning the tower looked the same, glass and light, precision and purpose, but something inside it had shifted. A mural was being painted in the lobby, a cityscape in blues and grays, a single beam of gold threading through it. At the top in small letters it said, Kindness doesn't take meetings. He smiled when he saw it. Lila was sitting nearby watching the painter. Do you like it? She asked. It's perfect, he said. You made a promise permanent. She grinned. Mom says you're semi-retired now. What does that mean? It means I finally have time to learn something new, he said. Like what? He thought for a moment. Like how to stay still without feeling that's hard. He smiled. The best things always are. That evening he took a train out of the city. No chauffeur, no entourage. Just him, a coat and a small bag. The countryside rolled past the window, rivers, fences, small towns with lights already turning on. He felt weight leaving him in small invisible increments, like snow melting off a roof. He arrived at a quiet town where no one recognized his name. Checked into a small inn with creaking floors and kind silence. Walked to the edge of a field and watched the sun go down with no agenda. For the first time in a long, long while, he realized the world didn't need to revolve around him for it to be beautiful. Weeks later, back in the city, the tower continued to thrive. Not taller, just bigger. Its walls remembered his hands, but its heart had moved on. And that was the point. He visited sometimes, never unannounced but always quietly. To drink coffee with the janitors. To read Lila's new poems pinned to the breakroom board. To sit at the piano and play a few hesitant chords until someone else took over. He was no longer the story's subject, only its proof. And that was peace. One rainy afternoon, he stood again in the lobby, looking at the mural as drops of water traced the glass behind him. The building felt alive, as though the walls themselves were breathing softly. He whispered, Thank you for outgrowing me. Then he turned, stepped through the revolving doors and vanished into the city. A man among millions, nameless, free, forgiven. They say the tower still hums at night. Not with machines but with memory. When the wind moves through its vents, it sounds almost like a heartbeat. People working late sometimes pause, listening, not sure if they're hearing air or grace. On the wall beside the lobby piano, someone added one final line beneath the mural, written in quiet silver paint. He taught a building to breathe, and the building taught the world. And outside the city glowed, not taller, not richer, but finally